All right. Hello, everyone. Sometimes our webinars just happen to coincide with related observations or holidays, but today's webinar is very intentional. May is, among other things, National Allergy and Asthma Awareness Month. That fits perfectly into our theme because today we're going to be talking about healthy homes, and we'll explore how weather and environmental conditions impact vulnerable populations and affect the built environment at home and at work, along with ways to ensure our homes help us live healthier every day. We'll discuss the indoor and outdoor conditions that may contribute to allergies, asthma, flu, and even COVID. Finally, we're going to learn a variety of near-term and longer-term steps that can be taken to create a healthier home throughout the year. Our guests today are Eric Kloss and Rick Bayless. Eric is the founder and CEO of Daily Breath, a cloud-based SaaS company delivering personalized environmental insights for better asthma outcomes. He is the innovator of Daily Breath, a mobile app that helps those with asthma pinpoint their triggers. And Rick is the founder and owner of A Healthier Home, a website and service company devoted to indoor air quality and the various afflictions that can affect your domestic health. He is board certified as an indoor environmental consultant by the Indoor Air Quality Association and a healthy home specialist by the National Environmental Health Association. Rick offers expert, unbiased evaluations and services regarding a home's environmental and wellness status. Now, this webinar's sponsor is PowerShift by NV Energy. It's a program that helps residential and business customers conserve energy and save money on their power bills. PowerShift is a one-stop resource to find energy-efficient products and services. For more information, please visit nvenergy.com/PowerShift. Now, to ask questions of our guests, simply use the questions box on the right side of your screen. I'll review those and pose them to Eric and Rick during the Q&A time set aside after their presentation. Eric, let's start with you.
Well, thanks, Mike, and thank you to Green Builder Media for this opportunity to join Rick in discussing why where you live matters to your health. So to start, everybody breathes 20,000 breaths a day, whether you're at home or at work, indoors, outdoors. We all breathe. We breathe, inhale air into our lungs, and we're breathing what I call the invisible sickness, right? Because we don't necessarily see what we're breathing, but we know that we're breathing various pollutants, various pollens, and things like that. So we're going to talk a little bit about breathing in the context of the outdoor weather and environmental conditions that you experience, as well as Rick's going to talk about indoor air quality. Next slide. So a growing number of people, and this would be, people who have respiratory conditions, people who have allergies, asthma. Over 75% of people who have asthma have allergic asthma. So for many of these people, it's becoming very, very difficult to breathe because pollution is getting worse, pollen is getting worse, and this is because of warming temperatures. So the interesting thing about Daily Breath is what we are trying to do with Daily Breath is trying to, ascertain what's the convergence of these things, weather, air pollution, and pollen. A lot of people look at air quality and pollen in isolation, but it's the convergence of these things. It's like a perfect storm of maybe a bad pollen day and a bad air quality day and hot and humid temperatures that may cause difficulty for specific populations. Next slide. So when it comes to pollution, these are just some examples of pollution. We have nitric oxide on the left, which is predominantly from your exhaust from your automobiles. On the right, we have ozone, which is a byproduct of many of the industrial complex plants, as well as automobiles are a contributing factor as well. And then the one in the middle, I just have kind of identified or specified because wildfire smoke over the last 2 years has been a really prevalent episode that seems to be occurring in more frequency because of hot temperatures, drought conditions that are leading to more wildfire potential. And once those wildfires actually occur, there's large amounts of smoke being thrown up into the air, traveling hundreds and hundreds of miles. Next slide. So the one thing that's really interesting about this is a lot of people don't really understand why these particulates really affect, someone's airways. And this is kind of an example of the different type of particulates that we're talking about. So you have a human hair here, and then the blue ones tend to be things like pollen. There are smaller pollen. Rye pollen is very granular, so that's as small as PM 2.5. A lot of your smoke particulates, which can be just from either the trees burning, or it can actually be from homes passing off toxic chemicals into the atmosphere. Those are all PM 2.5, and this gives you kind of a reference point for how small these particulates are and why they're so easily inhaled into someone's airways. Next slide. So again, we a little bit about pollen, but pollen season is increasing, so it's 20 days longer than it might have been 20 years ago, 30 years ago. But it's also, pollen is becoming more intense. So this is kind of a birch tree, and birch pollen actually is increasing in intensity because of the warmer temperatures. The growth is more rapid, it's more robust, and so you have more robust pollen, birch pollen. So again, pollen is on the, kind of the upscale as well. In addition to pollution, you're having warming temperatures creating more intense pollen, it's called allergenic pollen, that has a greater impact on people who have allergies. That's also another reason you actually see people who may not have had allergies previously suddenly having allergies, because they become now sensitized to a larger intensity of pollen. Next slide. Another key environmental condition that occurs with these warming temperatures as well as precipitation is mold. And I've given you an outdoor example here of mold, which is on leaves. A lot of times when you go outside to rake your leaves, kind of after some rain, you might see that there's a little bit of mold that's built up on the leaves. And then obviously we have indoor mold as well, which will segue really nicely into Rick's discussion. But mold spores are very, very toxic. Specifically, black mold is very toxic. But we're also seeing extreme weather events, whether it's hurricanes or whether it's precipitation events that create flooding. And what happens in these episodes is that people actually have to return to their homes after being away because of the flooding or the hurricanes, and they're actually moving back into a house that they are going to have to deal with some mold. Next slide. So again, this is just a representation of potentially of kind of how PM 2.5 particulates, mold spores, pollen spores, pollutants, all of these things really come into your airways, they get into your lungs, they create a level of inflammation. They also create a buildup of mucus, and these are all things that contributed to, allergy reactions, also asthma, basically airway constriction, which leads to asthma attacks. Next slide. So this is just a reference point. It's believed that over 30% of all global asthma emergency room visits are now caused by air pollution. And again, obviously, this is very prevalent in various cities around the world that are urban in nature. So whether it's New Delhi, India, or London, England, we're seeing growing impacts from air pollution. Specifically in England, there was recently a case where a young girl passed away from an asthma attack. They attributed it to air pollution, and the legal ruling was they agreed or concurred that the county or the community was negligent in dealing with air pollution, and as a result of it, that person had passed away. So we're seeing that correlation between air pollution and asthma attacks made quite frequently now. Next slide. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about daily breath. As I indicated previously, what I really wanted to do was capture the confluence of these variables. And so what you do with the app is you actually record your flare, a flare or a flare up or a symptom related to your allergies or asthma. And once you've recorded that, in the background, you're actually recording all the outdoor weather and environmental conditions that are occurring at that time. And that is represented in this daily breath forecast, which initially is evidence-based, based on studies that have been performed around these correlations with ER visits. But ultimately, because you're recording this real-world evidence, you're able to create a personalized symptom forecast based on all of the evidence you've gathered based on the individual symptoms. And then the third component that's very interesting is kind of this concept of crowdsourcing symptoms. So what you're seeing here is a representation on the map. People are actually experiencing symptoms, and this gives a different risk profile in addition to the daily breath risk index. It also gives you an idea of, okay, where in my community may I encounter an exposure that could lead to an asthma attack based on what other people have experienced. So this is what I call crowdsourcing or crowd sensing, because what you're ultimately doing is sensing risk based on what other people are experiencing in your community. Next slide. So I did want to get back to wildfire smoke. This is becoming an increasing problem. It has a more frequent influence on the air that many are breathing, specifically in the west coast or plains, Mountain West area. There's also, this is a phenomena down in Australia and other parts of the world as well. And again, weather conditions dynamically change the impact that these wildfires have. Winds can obviously carry the wildfire smoke. Precipitation can tend to dampen down those particulates. Humidity and dew point have an impact on kind of stagnating the pollutants in the air and making them more dense. And so I wanted to note that it's not just ground level smoke, which is what people see, but it's actually high altitude smoke that's carried, literally hundreds and hundreds of miles away and deposited with precipitation in a different location that can actually be impacting people who are vulnerable to these particulates. And so we really do need to begin to understand how symptoms are being impacted by wildfire smoke, specifically for vulnerable populations. And this is kind of the whole paradigm behind wildfire smoke: warmer temperatures, drought conditions, leading to more wildfires, leading to wildfire smoke. Next slide. So Daily Breath is a mobile app. It's available for download in the App Store, or you can get it on Google Play. The point of the app is to pinpoint your triggers, and by doing so, create your own personalized symptom forecast. You can reach me at eric@dailybreathforecast.com. And with that, I will segue to Rick, and Rick will talk about having a healthier home.
Okay, thanks, Eric. This is Rick Bayless with A Healthier Home. And again, my role is to help you make those connections between bodily health and what's going on in your indoor environment. The house you live in, the place you work, where your kids go to school, in the hospital, at the store, the places you go, but certainly the places where you spend the majority of your time. And that's probably inside your own home. With what Eric mentioned outside, that of all the stuff out there, you wonder, golly, do we want to be outside anymore for a breath of fresh air? It is not so fresh anymore. Matter of fact, that's why I call it, I don't call it fresh air anymore. I call it outdoor air, because as Eric said, it's not always fresh. When folks are having healthiness challenges, there may be a compromised immune system, or a neurological problem or a gastrointestinal problem. Well, that's all a matter of the body not being well and the effects being on other parts of the body systems. The body responding to something it's not happy with, and all the things that Eric mentioned outside are certainly not good for health, and not only give rise to allergy symptoms, but cascade into other health challenges, symptoms, and downturn in health. So with all that stuff outside, what do you do? By you're monitoring what's going on, when things are getting bad outside. It's time to retreat inside to escape from that. Well, how are things inside? Are you escaping to a place that also supports your health and wellness? So just like Eric says, you have to know your outdoor air conditions, be monitoring that. Well, you got to be monitoring and watch your indoor air conditions. Could you put the slide up on sick house syndrome? The sick house syndrome slide? Is that one up?
Yes.
Good. Yeah, sorry, I don't have the visual here. I'm just on the phone. I have voice connection to the group here today, but don't have visual. So sick house syndrome. If the house is sick, then the conditions inside the house will be sick, and it won't be in support of occupant health and wellness. You know, sick house, sick occupants. So in this slide of sick house syndrome, there are things conditions that can tend to give rise to uglier indoor air conditions, unhealthy. You have to be watching things like the temperature in certain parts of the house, the dryness, wetness, dampness, and humidity. That's nature's catalyst by which house conditions degrade more quickly if things get and stay wet, or get and stay damp, or get and stay humid. So controlling those will be important inside the house, and knowing when and where you have wet or damp or humid out of bounds is important to know. The other pollutants in the house, there's other toxins in the house, particulate as well as chemical, as well as the electromagnetic EMF. There's plenty of conditions inside the house are not so supportive to one's health either. So knowing those conditions is important to be sure that your place is safe haven from what you might need to escape from outside that particular day or time of day. So inside, there are some things there's two ways to address knowing your indoor environment. One is to be monitoring air conditions inside. And there are several devices you can get hold of. You could be measuring the humidity of the house with a humidity monitor. You can measure the temperature in the house, of course, with a thermostat and thermometer. Measure the EMF readings with an EMF meter. You could measure the radon with a radon sampling packet, or get yourself a more constant radon sampling device, a carbon dioxide sensor. So it's some things you can measure inside the house. Some indicators of ugliness inside the indoor environment, unhealthiness inside the indoor environment. But if you're picking up things on your meter, the ugly is already playing out. You're picking up airborne the symptoms of issues inside the house. So yes, watch those meters for when something appears to be going amiss, and start to look for that. But that points to the other part of knowing your indoor space, is not just monitoring the air inside, but actually monitoring your space, looking around for what's amiss. And that's the very central key to all this stuff. There's no substitute for that. You're going to have to go to your various parts of the house, things you haven't looked at in a long time, rooms you haven't gone into. Maybe you haven't gone in the attic in a while. Maybe you haven't looked at the duct system. Maybe you haven't been in the basement in a while, or in the crawl space, or spend some time looking around in there. That's what it takes to confirm where the ugly is beginning to play out. As good, like the third slide we have there, the house functioning dynamics. Kind of skip by the second slide and display the house functioning dynamics slide, please. Is that slide up?
Yes.
Yeah, good. Okay. There are playings out in a house. Dynamics that play out. Air movement patterns, moisture movement patterns. Pests come in, pests go out. We bring stuff in. Parts of the house get heated up and start to move air and moisture. Parts of the house get cooled down at certain times and other conditions. All these things point to the the fact that the conditions in the house are always in a state of change too. And your job at your house, for it to be safe haven from which you can't always escape from outside, is to know these dynamics, or at least know what the unfortunate ones are, and monitor and manage those so things stay down healthier territory. The house not going sick. Like, for example, a basement not staying too humid. If it stays too humid in the basement, then the materials down there that molds can feed on are going to be damp enough, and the molds will begin to grow on those things. So watching humidity downstairs, watching your rainwater management system for roof leaks, and spillover beyond the gutter system, and dumping of water at the base of the downspout right at the foundation of the house, which helps to wet the walls downstairs or wet the crawl space. So of all these things that can go sour at a house, conditions that go toward unfortunate give rise to unhealthier conditions and not supporting your health, they always translate back to hands-on, practical, doable house fix, house repair, house cleaning, house adjustment measures, 80% of which you could do yourself, falls in the realm of house maintenance, house monitoring, house maintenance. And that's what I do for folks in my business. I go out to places, to their house, or their business, their building, and see what's gone amiss. And it's just a matter of getting their house maintenance to-do list back in order. All right, here's what got away from you. Here's why the conditions went foul. Here's how you clean away what went foul. Here's how you fix that thing that allowed this condition to go foul. And here's what you watch so it doesn't go foul again. So it's always very doable to make your place a safe haven from pollutants and irritants and allergens that you can't escape from outside. I have a guidance for you. What do you do about mold? Well, on our website, go to our website and download the free mold ebook as an introduction to aspects of managing mold in your house. That's for mold control. Go to our website there and download that book. Go to our website and download the radon ebook to understanding how radon can impact health, and how do you monitor and control that in your house. At our blog postings too, we have monthly tips from our newsletters and blog postings of various aspects of how you keep ahead of environment, house systems, and health. Go to that site and browse around a bit. So at our site, we're focusing on the healthiness impact of these environmental issues, which start outside, as Eric said, but they continue inside, another set inside. And it's important to know both inside and outside conditions if you have healthiness challenges that are made worse by environmental conditions around you. Can we go ahead and open up the session to questions that folks have for us?
Mike?
Oh, we certainly can. I actually had a question for you, and I'm going to encourage our guests to put their questions into the questions box, which should be on the right side of your screen, I think. The first question I had for you was to Eric. You mentioned wildfire smoke and the spread that can occur over many miles. It made me think about just kind of pollution in general. How big of a diameter should we consider if we're trying to determine a, quote, danger zone?
So that's an interesting question. One of the things we're trying to do with the wildfire smoke is ascertain kind of the specific smoke zone, both for a ground level plume as well as a high altitude plume. And the ground level plume, maybe 50, 75 miles. The high altitude plume might be a little bit higher. But the fact of the matter is we don't have any really evidence to correlate, people having worsened conditions in the context of these specific types of plumes. We can ascertain some density as far as the smoke plume, but again, without kind of some evidence that's gathered by tools like Daily Breath, you can't really ascertain what the actual impact is. So it's hard to estimate, how bad that smoke plume is impacting, individuals on a personal level. And certainly, again, we can't necessarily ascertain that with understanding what their individual sensitivity is to smoke, right? Some people are going to be more prone to smoke than others. You have the phenomena of, if you're a smoker, if you work in an industrial plant, if you're around these types of smoke occasionally, would you be more susceptible to wildfire smoke or less susceptible to wildfire smoke? If you already developed a tolerance around airway inflammation, it's hard to understand that. As far as actual individual daily air quality issues, I think that's one of the things that we're aiming to do with the Daily Breath Community Flare-Up Map, is actually ascertain, are people experiencing more flares like outside of an industrial plant area, right? Because that would indicate that maybe those, particulates that are being spewed off by that particular plant, are more impactful to the community that's local to it. This is kind of an issue with, people who have housing in areas that are close to traffic corridors, right? Are more people experiencing, asthma attacks because they are being exposed to traffic exhaust, right? So I think this is an area of really growth opportunity, and it's only been really highlighted more by the issues around COVID, because people I think are understanding that, the air that we breathe on a daily basis has an impact on us.
Okay. Your answer kind of inspired a couple other questions in my mind. So I'd like to kind of follow along with this line of conversation right here.
Absolutely.
On the topic of plumes, obviously we're not the only ones who live in the environment. I know this talk was really focused on health in the home, and that implies humans, but there's a lot of animals.
Yes.
So when you talk about these plumes, have people kind of looked at the effects, upper level atmosphere pollutants, the effects on birds versus the stuff that does tend to get down lower that can affect, I'll just say, land-based animals as well as humans?
Sure. I mean, there's an entire movement that's described as kind of geohealth or One Health. And I think that that's part of the orientation here, is by looking at a geolocation, looking at some environmental factors that are affecting that geolocation, being able to look at everything that's affected by from a health perspective, whether it's animals, whether it's humans. But that is kind of this emerging area of study, which is focused on, what is the impacts on birds. But there's really, again, not a lot of evidence yet that's been gathered, because quite frankly, a lot of the gaps in this has been around measurement. From an outdoor perspective, measuring pollen, people use a flypaper that collects pollen spores, and then someone, visually measures and identifies the type of pollen, and that's how we, get our measurements for pollen. Air quality measurement is not at a very granular level, so we have, air quality measurement devices, maybe 150 across the United States, and the rest of the data is really extrapolated models. It's not real measurement data. So we have some gaps from a technology perspective that haven't permitted us really to accurately estimate these environmental exposures, and therefore it becomes harder to evaluate their impact on people or humans or animals.
Okay. And then
that's where that starts
please.
with this Rick with A Healthier Home. So there are some things that are difficult to have a direct impact on of what happens across a region of the place you live or beyond that. I recall one summer we had sand fall on everything. Right now the cars and outside is yellow with pollen, but that summer the cars were brown tan with sand from the Sahara Desert, from a windstorm. So actually, one question was asked of these outdoor pollutants, what's the regional reach? Well, actually nowadays it's actually global, and especially with the upper atmosphere, it's global. But well, okay, what do you do with that? How do I live today and tomorrow with all this? So don't overlook the things that you do have control over that are obvious. As I drove back to my house yesterday from a house I visited about 20 miles from here, I saw a plume from the paper mill, and I smelled the fumes from that in that town as I was looking past a transformer that's on a telephone pole outside from a house. Then as I drove further toward my place, I went through a highway construction area. I went past a truck that was carrying radioactive waste, and it said toxic on it. It passed me. Then I went past the high school where the kids are coming out, and they were doing work on the high school, and soil dust, clouds of soil dust coming up from the construction of the new wing of the high school. So it surrounds us all the time, and we have no direct control over that, but you do have control over what happens in your house. So at least take care of what you do have control over. It'll get you in the mindset of being mindful of what does play out unseen that does affect your health. And you can take that mindset and methodology and translate that into, okay, what can I do with the environment beyond my own house? So as overwhelming as these worldwide issues can be, don't overlook the things you can do in your smaller environment, in your house, in your neighborhood, in your town. Start with those things too. Don't overlook those opportunities for improving indoor air quality, indoor and out.
Gotcha. One other question on this line of conversation, and that is, how is all of this affected by altitude? So if I live at 500 feet above sea level versus 5,000 feet above sea level, is there really any effect because of how the air does get thinner the higher up you go, or does it not make any effect at all?
I think there's two answers to that question. One is physiologically, there's a certain impact on us when we are at high altitudes, okay? So there is some evidence that at higher altitudes, for example, you might be susceptible more to airway inflammation just because, again, the air may, as you're breathing, it may be more difficult to breathe at higher altitudes, and therefore maybe you're more susceptible to airway inflammation if you're exposed to an exposure. As far as the actual exposure themselves, again, this is an area that I've heard and listened to that is an area of opportunity for exploration. There isn't really a lot of evidence. You make a very good point, and I actually have to look at this in my weather data feed, but part of it is assessing the altitude when people are experiencing a symptom, right? So are they experiencing it at higher or lower altitude? So all of these things are things that I think the purpose of Daily Breath is really to ascertain. I call it situational awareness for asthma, right? Because what you're doing is by tracking your symptoms, you're beginning to understand under what conditions you experience your asthma attacks. And by understanding that, you can be more prepared in the future. And so maybe you do determine that, hey, I tend to be more susceptible to asthma attacks when I'm actually hiking in the mountains, right? And it could be because of the pollen, but maybe it's because of exposure to pollution, or maybe, again, maybe it's a variable of you being more susceptible at a health perspective, to having airway inflammation.
True. Sometimes lower elevations, like down in the valley, where pollutants will tend to hang out in certain temperature conditions. So unfortunately, sometimes you could be better up at a higher altitude or worse, and sometimes you might be better or worse at lower altitude. Like Eric says, it really is a situational matter. Those conditions are always in a state of change. And you begin to recognize when you don't feel as well and what conditions. You'll start to tap into all right, what's going on outside? Is this going to be a good day or a bad day for me to go on a hike high up in the mountains? Or should I get out of town on such a hot, smog type of day and go to the mountains where I could breathe better, even at high altitude, on an otherwise smoggy summer day down in the downtown in the lower valley? To
And the
become
thing,
aware of
Mike,
those situational conditions.
right, and the thing, Mike, that I would add here, and I think where this kind of meshes very nicely is that, for example, and Rick, you can talk a little bit more about this, but humidity is an extreme variable that has impact both on the outdoor conditions, but also on the indoor conditions. And so, humidity that's lower than a particular percentage or higher than a percentage has dramatic impacts on people who have specific respiratory conditions, because dry air can be bad for them, but then also very, very wet air can be bad for them.
Yeah.
Rick?
Yeah, absolutely. Wet, damp, and humid is a place you have to start with when we're trying to decipher indoor environmental healthiness conditions. But even in your own house, the locational aspect is really critical in a house. Just like Eric says outside, how do you feel when you're hiking at high elevations on this particular conditions today? Well, in your house, how do you feel when you go down and spend time in your basement, or have you poked your head in your crawl space? Or when you go in the garage, or when you go up to one certain room? What do you smell? How do you feel? Do you have a particular body sensation? If you spend, sometimes folks, I know some folks who Mrs. doesn't go downstairs at all because she can smell an odor down there the minute she gets halfway down the stairs. She never goes down there. Another person doesn't spend her time in a room because they have a body feel. Actually, in the case it was a EMF, electromagnetic exposure. She literally buzzed when she was in the room. So how do you feel in certain parts of your house, as a way to hunt down what that malady of the house is, so you can correct that, so now you can use your basement and you can go to that other room. So just like outside, how do you feel in certain conditions? Well, inside, how do you feel in certain zones of your house and under certain conditions? When the furnace is on or when it's not on, when we're in heating season versus cooling season. Important to pay attention to those situational happenings and how your body feels under those circumstances and those locations.
We also have some wonderful questions for our guests from the audience, because our audience always asks us great questions. So I appreciate all the questions that are coming in, and please keep them coming. I first want to get to a question from Elizabeth, and this is geared more towards Rick. As a consumer, when you're talking about indoor air quality, how do you figure out what kind of air filter to get for your air conditioner or your furnace? I mean, there's SEER and there's MERV and all this stuff. How do you cut through all that and figure out what I need to get for my specific situation?
Yeah, don't they make it hard of marketing perspectives, touting a particular method? Now, don't get me wrong. Every device out there has a useful purpose. The challenge is defining your need and your situation. The conditions in your house, these systems you have in your house, your ability to employ those systems to use these filters, and what your bodily and health need is. Because that'll help you zero in. So what are the conditions in the house? What's your health? What system do you have? You begin to narrow down that field of possible selections to get it down to, all right, looks like either 1, 2, or 3 methods would be better for me with my health needs and conditions in my house and the systems I have to work with. So it's back to knowing your house and your systems and your health, and having that conversation with folks who can guide you through such decision making. You can go to our site and browse around on the newsletters and blog postings that speak to that issue. The easy answer, all right, try to get a MERV 13 filter. It would be generally helpful and generally not hurtful to your air system. But there's a whole lot more to that. There's a whole other webinar to discuss that aspect of indoor air quality, of indoor air management.
Well, and Rick, just in general, I think, a couple things that I observed in your 3 slides was, well, number one, I mean, when we talk about air filters, are people changing their air filters, right, frequently or regularly, right? So that's for one question. The other thing I thought was really important about your comment about ventilation is, that I've seen a couple of, and it may have been on your website, but ventilation where mold was gathering because of maybe condensation, near the ventilation ducts, and so you now have the ventilation that's sick ventilation because it's actually carrying mold spores through the ventilation, through the duct work into the home. So I think those are interesting issues that we need to kind of focus on. People, again, I think of it in terms of there's these unseen threats that they're not able to ascertain on their own unless they're actually looking for them, right? And I think that that's an important component of what you do, is really exposing things that they may not be thinking about, that are probably very, very threatening to their wellness.
There's 2 sides to that. One is what you're not thinking of, what you haven't seen, or what you're not thinking about. The good news is all of these indoor environmental maladies, have 3-dimensional, hands-on, macroscopic pieces of the things you could see that are out of bounds. You can see where the house is sick. So once you do that, start to explore your house, you'll find that.
Right.
The other side of this is start with a broad view, because like even this question about which filter to use, if you begin your endeavors into pulling together environment, house, systems, and health from that specific perspective of one specific fix, you'll probably never get toward where you need to end up. It's important to start with a broad view of, as Eric says, start with what's going on outside. Start with what's going on in your neighborhood. Start by understanding the various parts and pieces of your house. As you look through your house, you'll see things that are obviously wrong and making it sick. You've got to fix those first. Then eventually come back down to what type of filter should I select. But starting with filter selection is really just going after a symptom. It's not going after the cause. The cause is that something's broken somewhere in the house. And if it weren't broken, you wouldn't have so much particulate production. And you wouldn't have so much in your stuff airborne in your house that the filter has to scrub out. So start with that broad view of your house, and then at some time pull in that conversation about what kind of filter could I be using. That comes later on in the conversation.
And Rick, in your experience, talking about filters for just a second, in your experience, is the recommended change cycle that is typically put on the packaging, is that something that you've found is reliable and consistent, or have
yeah, as Eric says, it's an okay start. Like Eric says, sometimes people have totally forgotten about their filter and they never check it at all. So at least if you're checking it every 3 months, that's better than not checking at all. The better answer is check it frequently during each season to get a feel for the pattern that plays out at your house. And in that, you'll find that you'll probably have to change the filter more often in the winter season, or probably in the winter season when we're inside, dusting up the house more so with our activities and trapping pollutants inside because windows and doors aren't open. They'll probably dust you up more often. Or when a child comes back home from college and their friends come over to visit, if we get back into that pattern anymore, social interaction, more activity in the house and dusting up the house more so during that period. So start by looking at the filter more frequently to get familiar with the pattern of the rate at which it dusties up. And you'll be able to come up with your own schedule of how frequently you should change a filter in your house under the conditions that play out in your house. And it won't be the 3 months standard. It'll be sometimes once a month. Sometimes you can let it go for 3 months. sometimes for 6 months, sometimes a couple weeks, depending on what happened in the house. So that 3 months is a very, very general guide and doesn't speak at all to what actually plays out in your indoor and outdoor environment, in your own neighborhood and your own house. You got to figure that out for yourself with observations.
And Mike, I do think that that kind of plays into this concept of personalized, whether you're experiencing outdoor air or whether you're experiencing indoor air, it's a personal experience, right? It's a personal experience on the outdoors, but you're also personally experiencing something that's occurring in your house. So you have to treat it as not all homes, but my home, right? And what's going on in my home.
Yeah.
There is
Just
a
as your
question
doctor
here.
would tell you, you're responsible for your own health. So yes, there's general health guidelines, but know your own bodily health so you can manage your daily activities in a way to keep yourself healthy. So this just falls in that realm of, know your own health under certain circumstances, what works for you, and know your house because your house needs you to maintain its health. So you're in charge of your own health, your bodily health, and you're in charge of your house's health. So spend some time getting to know both of those for better success.
So you're saying I have another child now that I didn't know about before? My gosh.
You do.
Right.
You got to. That house needs you to maintain it because it'll go sour if you don't maintain it. Yeah.
I'm just kidding. All right. Hey, we've got great questions coming in still, and I want to make sure we're going to get to them all. So please go ahead and send them in. We will get to them all. We were just talking about health, and we were talking about doctor visits. And so we had a question from, we have two different questions on this topic, so I'll go with Lynn's first. Lynn is asking, are the masks that are now keeping us protected from COVID exposure and transmission, is that perhaps valuable for pedestrians in urban environments? And is it also valuable for those who are living in areas that have polluted air due to fire season?
That's probably back to more situational again. Depends on what's airborne at the time.
Yeah, but the short answer is that we've had a lower incidence of asthma attacks. We've had a lower incidence of allergy symptoms over the past year because people are wearing masks. So there is some, evidence even in the short time that, COVID's been around, that is a reality, is that there's been a reduction of asthma attacks. People have been able to manage their asthma and control their asthma much more effectively by wearing masks. Now, having said that, I think the concern is that, people will bounce back to not wearing masks, and then what's the level of exposure they're going to experience now that, they're now, inhaling, pollutants or, inhaling pollen directly into their airways. So that, that definitely, is a concern. But, masks have always been, and even in the recommendations that are made within my app, Daily Breath, we say, this may be a day you want to wear your mask. Now, in the future, maybe because we've become so used to wearing masks that that's not going to be, much of a big lift for people to say, okay, I'm going out to work in the yard, I'm going to wear a mask, or, different things like that. And certainly, if you live in close proximity to an industrial plant or near a traffic corridor, that might be something you want to consider when you're outside.
And I think also in like your local forecast and the indoor air quality or the air quality metrics that they sometimes put on your local forecast, I think would also be a good guide as well, right?
Yes, exactly. And those are the same air quality metrics that I pull in. I identify those metrics, and then I also collect them into the Daily Breath Risk Index. There is a question here, Mike, about a medical practitioner, how to approach your medical practitioner. I just want to kind of address that a little bit. Within the within the asthma community, there are what you describe as home visits, and this is somewhat not as rigorous as probably Rick's evaluation of the home, but this is usually by a nurse or an asthma educator, and they go out to the home and actually assess the indoor air issues, and some of them are very similar to what we're talked about here, whether there's mold in the home. I found that someone interesting that like they don't do a 300-foot scan around the house, which again, from my perspective, you know, if there's a field of agriculture crops right outside somebody's home and you have your windows open, then you're susceptible to fertilizer and pesticides that are coming into your home. So there are some limitations to what they've done in these assessments, but that's certainly something you could suggest to your medical practitioner. What we're seeing now is those indoor assessments are being you know, are part of your health plan. So it's kind of a cost that's recoverable. And so that's one idea. And then again, Daily Breath is aimed at kind of collecting all of this information. Future versions of Daily Breath will allow you to consolidate maybe a monthly report and take it to your doctor and say, hey, listen, this is what I experienced the last month when I had symptoms. You know, and that gives them a prism for understanding, well, are they more susceptible, is that person more susceptible to mold or a specific type of pollen? That's been the biggest thing that I want to communicate around allergens. People think of trees, weeds, or grasses, but there's specific types of trees that you're allergic to. You may be allergic to an oak tree. Some people are allergic to pine trees. Some people are allergic to maple trees. And so I think it's very important that people get more granular information so that they begin to understand exactly what I call them offending allergens, right? Because if an allergen is causing you to have an asthma attack, then that's an offending allergen, and you need to figure out how to manage and control that allergen.
All right, I wanted to get to a couple other questions that came in. Oh, did you have something, Rick?
Yes, that's oh golly, where are we at with that question? Was oh, the health assessments is
medical practitioners
it's good that that's the beginning, but there's it's just the very beginnings of understanding and defining how one's house environment affects one's health. So it's important to go broad and go deep, as Eric said. They're not looking. It's important to look just beyond the house itself, the 360 in the neighborhood, and important to go into one's crawl space, go into one's central air system, to look inside ducts and the air handler, things like that. Those aren't happening as part of those health assessments. Mm-hmm. And it's important to reach out to folks who do have that a deeper breadth of understanding about what does go sour and unhealthy in house environment. And health assessments, they're not quite there yet. But at least someone's starting to look at indoor environmental health at the start. But we have a bit of a ways to go there on that front.
We also had a question come in from Lynn about when using a bathroom fan, do you want to keep the door closed? And if so, how do you figure out, the moisture, is not passing into the rest of the spaces of the house? So can you talk a little about bathroom fan use?
There's a lot to that. Start with the bath fan is not a room dryer outer. It's a air dumper to outside. Pretty much it's dumping the steam to outside that you're making while you're showering and filling the room with steam. It's a steam remover to outside. It's also an odor remover to outside. And it's also a noise maker. Sometimes you want a little background noise going on while the bathroom's in use. But it's not a room dryer outer. It's a terrible problem to leave a room in the house very damp all the time. So turn the bath exhaust fan on when you're making steam. As soon as you turn off the shower head, no steam being made, go ahead and turn the bath exhaust fan off and wipe down the shower stall with a towel or shirt that's going, or squeegee it or something to get the shower stall dry. If you use that bath exhaust fan to dump out steam and then dry out the shower stall, that'll make a world of difference in bringing down the dampness in that room most quickly. And have the door closed while you're exhausting to outside. you get a better, stronger pull from the bathroom rather than pulling from other places. So yes, close the door when you have the bath exhaust fan on, but turn it off and dry out the shower stall otherwise when you finish taking a bath or shower.
We're going to take our questions outside now, and we've got a couple of them pertain to outdoors. So one came in from Billy, and this may be a very, unique or rare situation, but he's saying that local air quality levels are sometimes inaccurate because they may be based on a city or area that's close by, but with different conditions. So he lives in a community in Colorado, and generally the outdoor air quality levels are listed as the same as Boulder, but that's 2,500 feet lower, and Winter Park, which is on the other side of the Continental Divide.
Right.
So
yeah,
as
as I indicated, I mean, so ironically, the air quality index where I'm at in Northern Virginia is actually from a measurement device that's in Silver Spring, Maryland, which is probably about 35 miles as the crow flies. And so, yes, you're exactly right. That's part of the challenge is we don't have a lot of granular level information because we don't have sufficient number of measurement devices. Now, this is an area of opportunity for innovation, and we've seen literally in the last year to 3 years the emergence of smaller sensors that have a smaller form factor. They're cheaper to deploy. So there's companies out there that are introducing these into the market so that you can get down to maybe an every 3 mile radius of air quality measurement devices that are measuring these various air quality indicators, whether it's nitric oxide, ozone, PM 2.5, all of this kind of stuff. So that is kind of why having a platform like Daily Breath will ultimately try to accommodate as many of these measurement or there's two types of data. There's measurement data and then there's satellite data, right? And so there's a combination of those two that occur. Right now, wildfires are predominantly tracked by satellite data. And then, obviously there's local air quality measurement devices that are tracking the air quality. But again, those are not in enough proliferation that we have, really small granular level data. It's only by having satellite data that you're able to, provide maybe that broad perspective of where particulates are. But it is an area where we need to focus more and more on those types of devices, and then having platforms like Daily Breath, we can consume that data and then provide you much more rich information about the environment that's directly around you.
Don't overlook the obvious. Yeah, the obvious of the wildfire in some distant states versus the brush pile that the neighbor has burning in the backyard next door to you. So be sure to keep your eyes and ears and nose open for what's happening in distant places as well as very nearby.
So sticking with the outdoor theme for a moment, Lynn had a question about firefighters. How are firefighters impacted from wildfires? Is there special equipment that's available for them?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously the regular equipment that a fireman actually wears when they're in the middle of battling a fire often does include respirators and breathing equipment and stuff like that. So they may be somewhat protected, but again, wildfire smoke is toxic. It's not just burning wood from trees, but it's also burning homes, burning plastics, all of these kinds of things. So, again, I can't say that it's 100% protected if you're a firefighter and you're battling these types of fires. We do see higher incidences of respiratory issues for firefighters, and that's not really too surprising. But most firefighters are trying to equip themselves with breathing instruments when they battle those fires, like respirators and stuff like that.
So we have a rebuttal that came in from David, going back to the bathroom fans for a moment. And his comment is that Bathroom fans must run an additional 30 minutes to reduce the moisture level from a shower back to initial conditions per research. He's saying do not turn the fan off when the shower is over. Thoughts on that?
Yes, there's unfortunately there are broader dynamics at play. So, as first of all, where is that bath exhaust fan dumping to? Is it disconnected in a wall cavity or up in the attic? But even despite all that, as you know, it has a constant pull causing a suction in the house. So if we're in a high dew point day outside, and you're exhausting the bathroom to outside, you're pulling that much more moisture in from outside at some point, and other parts of the house on its way to the bath exhaust fan to leave. There's always there's two sides to every fan. So it's best to use the fan to dump the excess of dampness out, because as the conditions run, it can be pulling outside air. It will be pulling outside air into the house. And what's the condition of outside air over in the next 30-minute period or the next hour or so? So unfortunately, there's no definite yes answer to any of these dynamic questions. Sometimes it's good to leave it on for a while, and sometimes it's not going to be so good. My point to this is, don't rely on just the fan. Dry the room out too. Don't overlook the obvious aids to bringing conditions under control. Dry the room out. That'll make a world of prompt difference in the humidity in that one room.
Okay. We're right about our hour mark. We have one last question to get to. It came in from Bruce. Some of these pollutant checks that was on that slide that you showed there, they appear in the code, correct? I'm thinking about radon, CO detectors, smoke detectors. Some of those things are required. But is there, I want you to kind of look into a crystal ball real quick. Is there something else when it comes to safety that you think might be added to the codes at some point in the future?
Oh golly, there's electromagnetic pollution, EMF, other energy wavelengths. There are particulate counts, maybe the count on PM 2.5.
Mm-hmm.
Other chemical formaldehyde levels, or other chemical pollutants. Mold, amounts of mold in a house, either mold toxins, toxic gases, or mold particulates. I'm not sure if we'll ever get there and have a definitive airborne mold count level that some agency says, okay, up to this point we're okay. For past that point, we're out of bounds. We have a long way to go with that kind of research. Only since there are so many dynamics at play that make it so extremely variable in one house to another, one season versus another, when certain symptoms are on or not, and one healthiness challenge versus another, and also on variables and all that.
Right.
So there's a lot more that could be part of that mix, but we have a long way to go with that in the indoor environment.
Right. And Mike, I think PM 2.5 are clearly the greatest threats. Those are increasing in the pollutant variables, and I think that's one area. But I also think that Rick can kind of speak to this, but I think we have to think not just about kind of code, but we have to think about innovations in ventilation, innovations in how we're air conditioning our homes, various things like that, because I don't think you can necessarily regulate yourself out of a situation where, because of a changing climate, these conditions are getting worse, not better, right? And so in that construct, I think we need to be constantly thinking creatively. I've seen, industrial air purifiers. They're like big smokestacks that suck, bad air in and clean the air and things like that. And again, I think those are areas where people have to realize that as long as pollution is still going to be around, we have to think about, how do we create clean air? We're going to do our best.
For the thing that there is a regulation for that you're watching and monitoring, what about the other stuff of dust and lint from your bedding and your towels and your carpeting and whatnot? Those respiratory irritant allergens. Now, I guess indirectly get under PM 2.5 with all that. But recognizing these sources of irritant, pollutant, allergen, and controlling the obvious maladies in your own immediate space, regardless of whether there's a code or not. Don't allow excesses of any of these things that could be bad for health to be there. Bring them down to more modest levels, manageable levels, tolerable levels.
And that's why I was asking from a safety perspective, right? Because obviously radon made its way into the code for a reason. Smoke detectors, okay, fire, trying to prevent fire, but carbon monoxide made it in because of safety. And so I just didn't know if there was something else on the safety side of things, because I don't want to discredit all the different things you had listed on that slide. I think those are all things we need to look out for. But there's a line between health and safety, I think, and something like a radon, like a CO, that has potentially fatal effects. And so I was just curious from that angle, is there something else out there that maybe we just haven't dealt with in the codes? As someone who writes about codes, I'm just curious if there's something out there that hasn't been addressed yet in the building codes for the safety portion.
It'll come down to whether something's in code or not. It'll always come down to how did it actually play out at this place or that. Recognizing that these conditions are always going to be a state of change. So like for example, unvetted log sets are allowed by code, not in some parts of the house, but in others. Well, then the busy family who has the teenage daughter said, I'm tired of bunking with my little sister. I want my own room. So they let her have her room, her bed downstairs, and have the whole basement area that has an unvetted log set in it. When I went to open the door to look downstairs for mold, because they asked me to look for mold, actually I tell them, no, I'm looking for adverse healthiness conditions, not just mold. I opened the door to go downstairs, and I was hit with the flue gas odor from the pilot light in the unvetted log set. The pilot light was on all the time. And within 5 minutes, my upper respiratory was irritated. The downstairs was filling with flue gases from the pilot light from that unvetted log set. So the device is allowed by code, but someone put their bed downstairs and turned it into a bedroom, and they spend at least maybe 8 hours sleeping down there in a gas-filled room. So that is absolutely a health and safety issue, but that situation is kind of allowed by code. But you got to look around for what's actually playing out, along with understanding what code is and recognizing the kind of dangers that are out there.
Gotcha. Well, I don't see any other questions, so I want to thank Eric and Rick for sharing their time and knowledge with us today. It was a topic that we don't get into very often here, but is certainly important. So we appreciate you coming on and talking with us. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you for the opportunity. Really appreciate it.
Yes, thanks for hosting us and having us here join the conversation.
Yeah, and thank you to our audience for attending and asking wonderful questions, as you always do. And thank you to PowerShift by NV Energy for their generous sponsorship of this webinar. Our next webinar will take place in just 1 week on Wednesday, May 19th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. We're going to be talking with Anthony Denzer about what the U.S. can learn about the best-made homes in the world. This is another installment in our Housing 2.0 affiliated virtual courses. Until next week, Stay safe out there, breathe easy, and take care, everyone. Bye-bye.